So good afternoon, everyone. I am Yahuwah Williams, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences here at St. Thomas, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the First Friday Luncheon of 2018. As a relatively new member of the St. Thomas community, I continue to be impressed by the power of the Tommy Network. It's alive and well in this room, and it is truly a pleasure to be part of a community that lives its values. And there's nothing that Tommies value more than community. So whether you're a Tommy spouse, a Tommy parent, a Tommy mommy, and today only primarily because we trounced you in that game last September, even a Johnny. Welcome home. I want to thank the platinum sponsors for our First Friday series, Minnesota Bank and Trust, and our gold sponsor, the Executive Education Program, and our Opus College of Business. We look forward after our meal to hearing from Mike McAvoy, President and CEO of The Onion, and a 2002 graduate of the College of Arts and Sciences. With majors in Spanish, business administration, and accounting, Mike made the most of his liberal arts and business education from St. Thomas in his leadership role at The Onion. I know we're all looking forward to his talk following lunch. Promise, no fake news. And at this time, I ask Father Larry Snyder, Vice President for Mission, to lead us in prayer.
I'm Father Larry Blake, the other Father Larry, and I'm happy to be with you today, and I ask you to join me in a moment of prayer. Loving God, source of life, author of friendship, look with favor upon our gathering today. Give to us, your servants, enough happiness to keep us grateful, sufficient trials to keep us strong, enough hope to keep us looking forward, sufficient failure to keep us humble, enough friends to give us comfort in life, sufficient wealth to meet our needs, and enough determination to make today better than the day before and tomorrow better than today. Bless our time together, the good food thankfully received, and good friends in thoughtful conversation. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
You are so in for a treat this afternoon. It's been my distinct pleasure for the last few minutes to be able to talk to today's speaker. Both Mike and his wife were graduates of St. Thomas, as I mentioned, in 2002, but both of them were both in the College of Arts and Sciences and in the business school. And when you talk to them, you really get a sense of how this sense of resilience and impact defines Tommy's. So it's been a wonderful conversation for that reason for me. And now my honor to introduce today's speaker. As president and chief executive of The Onion, Mike is responsible for the day-to-day operations of both The Onion and its sister publication, the AV Club. He has direct oversight of the company's advertising, product development, technology, and finance departments. Prior to becoming president at The Onion Incorporated, he was a financial analyst and comptroller, chief financial officer, and COO for the company. He has also worked in banking and online education before joining America's finest news source. Please join me in welcoming Mike McAvoy.
Thank you. All right. Woo! It's a dream of mine, you know. Always wanted to be in this building 13 years ago. I knew we were going to build it. Had a dream. All right. Give me 1 second here. Let's see if this thing works. So, When I was invited up here, I was thinking about what I want to talk about, and graduating from St. Thomas and being able to speak to a bunch of alumni and friends is obviously really exciting. And part of me want to talk about kind of the journey that I've taken through from St. Thomas, working in business, getting a dream job at the Onion, all the business challenges that happen in publishing and digital media, and how you have to innovate companies and blah blah blah. But that didn't really seem too exciting. So thought I'd roll the dice and instead talk about kind of a guide to ethical journalism. Now, just want to pre-apologize to anyone over the course of the next half hour who will get offended. The motto of the Onion is to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. So even though we make jokes sometimes that may seem offensive, underneath it, there's a target that's actually something true and powerful. And this is particularly important today, kind of in a world of, kind of where fake news, something that started being referenced formally as part of the Russian and, potential collusion in the, in the election and among other things. And so I really want to talk about how we can make America smarter and how we can make readers smarter through satire so that people can actually learn to be skeptical of what they read, which is the only way to eliminate true fake news and have satire. So now we'll go into a little mythology of what makes the Onion the Onion. Allegedly, it was established in 1765. Some say 1756, but truthfully, it started in 1988 at the University of Wisconsin-Madison by a couple of kids who wanted to sell pizza coupons, but thought it was too expensive to create real news, so they started to make fake news. Sadly, it wasn't this, intentional satirical outlet that it is today. Just a couple guys trying to make a few bucks. So we've gotten quite big, We've reached 4.3 trillion people, over 350,000 journalists. We got bureaus around the nation, and, we're around to help. So we help China. We help Syria, Somalia, and the Soviet Union. So pretty important stuff. On top of that, a few other things that we're interested in. All right, let's be a little more serious. But over the years, let's talk about our core business. We've created some of the finest journalism in human history. So you may remember a few of these. Coca-Cola official sponsor, kind of like that branded advertising. A classic. And this one's so while those are, funny and actually have an inherent truth underneath, the goal of fake news, which has become so popular, is really meant to mislead people. So you make some kind of outlandish statement, and your goal is for them to actually, believe that it's true. Meanwhile, the Onion, as a satirical outlet, has the exact opposite intention. What we try to do is get people to see something that's so hyperbolic that they pay attention, but then ultimately underneath that, they actually realize there's a human insight, a truth, that makes them a little smarter about how to consume stuff. In order to do that, we use a ton of different tools, mostly, ridicule, hyperbole, but it's all about shedding that important light. So let's just use a couple examples. There's real issues with SeaWorld, People have written about it. People have a hard time explaining, kind of separating this great family entertainment for the way that it gets treated. Sometimes you got to make similar jokes in order to get this point heard. And sometimes that means that you need to, it needs to be a little uncomfortable in order for the truth to be communicated. And that's the part of not wanting to offend anyone, but you got to keep making jokes in order to get people to pay attention. I know, it's dark. It's dark. But this group can handle it. I learned that, years ago. So at the Onion, everything starts with the headline. Now you think we only write animal jokes. Okay, well, a little cleaner. Or just smart. President Obama actually gave Meryl Streep an award, and he quoted this Onion headline, which was fantastic. And I saw her at a journalism event a few months ago in New York, and she actually has the Onion front page of this headline on it, which I think is the coolest thing in the world. So I'm a big fan. And then we've also written about this guy, and who's flip-flopped about everything. So the Onion is built on a foundation of truth. We have an intense commitment to quality. So what does that mean? It means every single week there's 1,500 headlines that are pitched to a room of writers. Of those 1,500 headlines, only 30 or 40 of those will actually be published. So another way to say it is our success rate is 2%, which sounds pretty impressive. And if you look at this chart, that's our acceptance rate. You may not have seen the University of St. Thomas on there. I think it's at 1%. I don't know what number it is these days, but they accepted me, and I'm always thankful. That kind of approach has actually, won us a Peabody Award for Best Broadcast Journalism in 2008 as the only digital company who won a TV award for not being on TV. And we did it for coverage of the 2008 election that had really profound statements that made people think. Basically, we told people the truth. And we're still relevant 10 years later because we tell the truth. So we talked about how the world is full of fake news. Here's just a sample of a few of the things that you will see. These are obviously real stories, not Onion stories. And as I said earlier, the goal of fake news is to actually tell lies, to get people to think, that something is true. And a lot of times these come from kind of crazy websites with domain names that no one knows about. And so at The Onion, we always try to satirize this to make sure that when you're reading something, you actually look at where it's coming from, And I personally think that's really funny. But this room's a little different. And what the point of those articles is, it's rewarding people with what they want to hear. It's about, kind of confirming an assumption that you had because it's more convenient and comfortable to have it that way. And that's the reason why The Onion is more important than ever before. But let's talk about how we actually got into this fake news mess. We had the Russian interference with the U.S. election, but the bigger issue was that social platforms started to dominate the news cycles. So in the days of old, news outlets used to kind of lay out the news that was fit to print or the most relevant pieces of journalism to get people to say, this is what you need to know today. And now everything is personalized by a feed. The more that you actually like a certain type of content or you agree with it, regardless of its source, the more that you see it. So the inherent bias of one individual creates more assumptions that keep that same filter bubble of knowledge, kind of tight. And so we've satirized that at The Onion, and people had the option to change their behavior, but people don't want to change their behavior. And we've always loved Breitbart. But the term, fake news, which used to be a good thing, has really been something that's been going on for a long time. So let's talk about how we got there. In 2008, politics became acrimonious. And let's look at a few things The Onion covered in that, great election. There were beliefs that were so outrageous about any sides of the candidates that, there was a lot of hate between these groups. and even a guy like Joe Biden. So, quick story on Joe Diamond. Joe Biden, we call him Diamond Joe. He loves The Onion. Actually has said that the character we've created for him, Diamond Joe, is his favorite thing. There is audio of this, so I'm not making that up. But the character we create, because he's actually a distinguished gentleman, is that he's this wild man who runs around, but he's actually a good man. Just wanted to say that.
Just yesterday, Barack Obama was reelected to a second term as president, but that does...
I'm going to just tee this up real quick. So we created this video years ago that kind of highlighted, you know, it really predicted the state that we would be in today. So I'll play it for you.
Just yesterday, Barack Obama was reelected to a second term as president, but that doesn't mean it's too early to start looking ahead at potential GOP candidates for 2016. Some experts say a front-runner has already emerged in the form of this shrieking white-hot sphere of pure rage. The sphere seen here decimating homes in a small Maryland town is testing through the roof with conservatives who were disappointed with Obama's victory last night. Jason Copeland, why is this thing so popular?
Well, Andrea, look, this screaming orb just might be the only one who really taps into the deep-seated, seething fury felt by so many Republicans right now.
That's true.
This thing is young, it's exciting, it feeds off fear and terror. It's no wonder conservatives are raving about it.
Mitt Romney just didn't get me fired up enough to vote. But that sphere of anger really speaks to me, usually through my television or in my nightmares. It's got me building this hive.
Now, we know the thing is popular, but does this rage sphere actually want to run for president?
Well, Andrea, it hasn't said no. I mean, when interviewed, the howling conservative plasma orb reportedly said, quote, a loud whirring sound, some unintelligible shrieks, bow before me, more piercing violent shrieks, guns, not our America, and then it just repeated faggots at a deafening pitch for hours and hours.
Okay, but that sounds pretty non-committal,
Well,
Jason.
that's right. I mean, look, you know, if Republicans want this thing to run, they're going to have to find some way to trap it, communicate with
Absolutely.
it, steer it in the right direction. Some conservative leaders have already begun offering sacrifices of virgins and livestock, which is a good first step, obviously.
And Jason,
so,
now,
I mean,
we are getting some breaking news right now that the sphere is making further political inroads. Apparently, Senator Richard Burr of North Carolina has just an hour ago resigned his seat in the Senate to the beast. In an official statement that we have here, Burr said, quote, it will do better than I ever could. Nowhere to run. Lead me to my end. I am worthless. It owns us. That's a quote, Jason.
Big development there.
Yeah, so grows the orb. Now, Jason, is it too soon to speculate as to who the sphere might pick as its running mate?
Well, I can't see the sphere picking anyone other than the dark, ominous cloud of racism that the Republicans love so much.
Oh, right. I mean, it's been around for years. It has experience.
And if the party gets serious about its ground game in Iowa and the maelstrom's able to maintain cohesion without exploding and exterminating life on this planet, I think we can expect the announcement of a white-hot sphere horrible lurking fog ticket as early as Christmas 2015.
Thank you, Jason. Later in the hour, we'll take an in-depth look at some early frontrunners for the Democrats, including Joe Biden, Martin O'Malley, and the magical arc of empty promises.
All right, so a little hyperbolic, but makes a really strong point. And this is where we, arrived in 2016. But one of the things about The Onion, it will always make fun of both sides of the house. So we always had fun with Hillary or Bernie. But ultimately, it's that divisive political climate that allowed fake news to exist. And, the reason why The Onion's important is because it speaks truth and it gets you to actually question those beliefs or those articles or those things you read that you're not really thinking about, and maybe they're confirming some inherent bias or some belief that maybe should be challenged. And covering things that are important, even though we got a big memo coming out, or maybe it came out an hour ago, but ultimately making fun of everyone. Here's another little video about
Throughout the campaign,
emails.
Hillary Clinton faced criticism over her use of a private email server that her opponents believed allowed her to hide her role in Benghazi and in other cover-ups. Nobody had found a smoking gun until a Reuters intern uncovered this.
One Clinton email among tens of thousands dumped by Julian Assange that changed the race forever. It begins innocently with a line to a staffer. "That all works for me. I'll see you Sunday." But then she starts a new paragraph. "Was feeling proud about Benghazi earlier today. Glad we let Ambassador Stevens get killed purposely." That's where things got interesting. Really interesting.
She goes on. "We sent a strong message to the military, who I don't think are very good or hardworking. In fact, I laughed like a Woody Woodpecker when I saw what happened to the consulate."
To me, the point of politics is to concentrate wealth in the hands of a few rich individuals, even if it hurts Americans, especially if it hurts Black Americans, whom I still call super predators. Did it hurt her in the polls? Sure. But a lot of shit happens during a presidential election.
We didn't hear a lot about that memo other than from The Onion. So let's talk about 2018. We had, a nice little Russia incident. We have our president. We had Jeff Sessions. And I love Jared Kushner. So if people take what we write or anyone writes as real, then we haven't done our job as satirists. We want to be absurd so people actually think a little bit harder about what they're reading. And this is an article we wrote a couple months ago that really kind of describes how people react to news. But sometimes people actually believe what The Onion does is real. So in those moments, I feel like satire doesn't really do its part. And we get a lot of feedback. Here's an article that was written that made a pretty, weird point. 1,300 people were upset about that. Here's one that seems dark, but it was meant to highlight government conspiracy, and someone wrote in that there were actually 2 towers. Now, I know Minnesota's had, their challenges and obviously their success, kind of building a stadium for the host of the Super Bowl this weekend. This is an article we wrote years ago that says Congress threatens to leave D.C. unless new Capitol was built with a retractable roof. And the Chinese government actually believed it as real, So that happens. Another great one, you may recognize the man on the left. Sexiest Man Alive, 2012. People's Daily of China picked it up and added a 54-page slideshow to show how amazing Kim Jong-un is. And while the focus has been a lot, kind of on international things, it can hit really anyone in politics. And so the Onion wrote a story probably 4 or 5 years ago about Donald Trump, titled this: "When you're feeling low, just remember I'll be dead in 15 or 20 years." And the point of the article was meant to say no matter, this is before he was running for election, just saying even though he's not a great person, at some point he won't be here. And Michael Cohen, who's a gentleman who we've seen in the news a lot lately, actually wrote us this demand letter where he, threatened to sue us. And what was so weird about this situation is not just that we're going to, threaten to sue. When we, as satirists, you're protected by the First Amendment, and as long as you're making something up that's completely ridiculous and it's not libel, and there's a point to it underneath, that you're protected. But, Trump's attorney was so upset that this is the first thing The Onion had ever done that they were really offended. But 6 months before, we had created this article to which there were no defamation complaints, which is a little crazy to me. And we were doing that before the small hand things came out in the open. So journalism is more important than ever. Just to summarize a little bit, because I think we did learn something, even though may have offended a few people. But We use tools to, to showcase truths by ridiculing situations. It means a lot of things that we do are uncomfortable, but we're making people think more, So even those things that may have offended you, hopefully they made you think about the actual reason we wrote the article underneath it. And in a world that's more polarized than ever, it's more important for people to actually think and pierce their own filter bubble, as the way you consume news is different than what you did years ago. So challenge those uncomfortable truths. And if you forget me, here I am. Thank you. So I don't know if people have any questions. Happy to go on, or if I need to be pulled off the stage in fear that I'm going to say something offensive, we can do that too. Go for it.
Is there an Onion Public Radio?
There's not an Onion Public Radio. There's a podcast that we're doing that comes out on Monday called A Very Fatal Murder, which sounds kind of brilliant, but murders are fatal. But it's meant to satirize serial. But we've done things in the past for this product called Onion Radio News, which are kind of short clips. We've been playing a lot around lately on the development side of getting into podcasting, not in a kind of a scripted comedy way, but more in something more thoughtful about why the Onion does what it does. But we don't have an actual public radio product, unfortunately. Yes.
So I have a question about the Tide Pods articles.
Yeah.
That, kids are eating Tide Pods, and it's being attributed to the Onion and starting that whole thing. And I'm just wondering, when kids are reading fake news, and what is the responsibility of the Onion to respond to that?
Yeah, I'm going to blame that one on the parents, personally. I mean, I'm not a great dad, but I know not to do that. No, I mean, I think there's a disclaimer, first of all, in the Onion that you have to be over 18 to read it. I want to make that clear. But I think the point, of satire is to do things that are so ridiculous that no reasonable person would think they're true. I think the point of being a good parent is to help people actually know what reasonable is. But I do think there's always this fine line, within what we do, and that's why we always want to make sure we have the right, kind of targets of jokes, where we talk a lot about, kind of punching up instead of punching down. So if you take on the bully instead of the victim, then there's actually a truth to what you're doing, And the weird thing about every marketer in the world, even though we sell a lot of money to advertisers, is that they all actually market to these children as well as these adults, which in and of itself has its own kind of moral questions. Yes?
Two comments first. Fitting to the writing you guys did after September 11th was superb. Some of the best writing about that time.
Thank you.
How you're choosing to address mass shootings now, very subtle, but yes, very subversive, and good on you guys. I'm curious, though, that a lot of people are co-opting your style, your art, for the purposes of trolling now, even on major networks. I think of Jesse Waters.
Yep.
Comes top of my mind about how we're just doing what the Onion does, when in fact all they're really doing is using it as an excuse to be crass, or as you say, punch down. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think that's the hard part, for us. So, we go back to that kind of success rate thing of having 1,500 headlines and only, picking 30 or 40 that we want to publish. And that's because those other headlines, while they're funny on the surface, they might not have a point to them or a truth that's actually worth defending. But the truth is, with the internet, and I think a lot of people, their goal is either to tell a lie or to just make a laugh. And anyone can make a laugh. But I think consumers aren't always smart enough to understand what people are saying and kind of question, what is the goal here? What is this reasonable? Is it true? And these social platforms have only encouraged that consumption. So they're the ones, prioritizing things that people are sharing. People are sharing things that they think are confirming beliefs that they have. So I think it's kind of a vicious cycle. But in terms of us, our hope is that, these platforms who control so much of media become smarter and more sophisticated. And they've announced many initiatives over the last, year that they think they're going to police. But it is, I think ultimately it's on consumers. And, the tagline of The Onion, outside of America's finest news source, which I appreciate, is Tu stultus es, which is Latin for you are dumb. And I think it's a pretty smart group. But, I think in the end, The Onion exposes things that are dumb, and I think readers should actually be questioning these things they read. But it's a good question, And I will say on this September 11th stuff, one of the things people forget about comedy is everyone's afraid to tell jokes after periods of tragedy. But, The Onion was the first place to actually make jokes post 9/11. And what people also forget about comedy is that it's cathartic. And people need to be able to process information, and sometimes it's easier to process through a joke than it is to, do it through any other way. So I think that was an important moment for us, and it's also carried through to how we cover, tough things that happen in the world, like Charlie Hebdo for us in our business, or every mass shooting that it really only happens in America. Yes.
Can you talk about your transition from print to digital and what challenges you might have on the business side of things?
Yeah. So The Onion has always been a 100% advertising focused, or funded business. So it was in the newspaper business, but wasn't in the subscription business, just handing out, kind of free weeklies. So for us, in some ways, it was easier to go from print to digital because we weren't sacrificing subscribers in exchange for new customers. But I think, the big thing for us is, I think for everybody, is you have to be willing to cannibalize an existing business that you have. And the print business was a good business for us in order to build a better digital business. And it meant spending a lot of time thinking about what advertisers needed, how could you build a branded content studio or called a digital ad agency to deliver on those needs. But in the end, it was all about, being willing to kind of change the brand that you grew up with in print and make it something that was bigger than that. And that was a hard thing for a lot of people, on our staff, of being like, how could we be The Onion if we don't have a print edition? But in the end, the world changes and you got to move on. Yes?
What's the process to get from those 1,500 potential headlines to the 30 that you print? Are you involved, or is your job more to run the business?
Yeah, my job's more running around, going to random places, slinging ads these days, which is probably the best part of a job. No, sadly, it is running around doing a lot of corporate stuff. But as far as the team, there's an editor-in-chief who runs each of our brands, and we also have another comedy brand called Clickhole, which does similar things to The Onion, but is even more absurd than The Onion. And it's taking these 1,500 headlines. The group votes on about 150 or 200 of them that they actually think are the best jokes. And then those jokes are actually discussed to kind of get them down or get enough votes to become the 30 or 40. And once the 30 or 40 are established, it's not just thinking about, okay, is this a full story? Is this a news and brief, which is kind of a shorter paragraph joke? Is it, just a one-liner with an image? Just kind of figuring out that stuff. Or some things, are they videos? But it's also then making sure the draft itself the target is right underneath the joke. Because sometimes when you read The Onion, and we are very intentional about this, but we want you to be able to get the target in the headline. But sometimes it's hard to understand the true truth until you read the whole article. So I think that's all part of that process. Yes.
In the category of truth, stranger than fiction, I think I see a lot of times people read real news and think it is The Onion until they look more carefully. A recent example is the emotional comfort peacock story.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering if you've ever mistaken a real news story for an Onion one, or if there's something that you wish had been yours.
Ooh, that's a good question. It always scares me when the real news is The Onion. And it makes our job a little harder. But I can't think of the right example, but what you said is a good one. But Yeah, I think it just, there's a subreddit called Not the Onion, where it kind of basically takes everything in the world that happens that people think is, the onion, but sadly it's true. So I think that kind of goes back to that point of tu stultus es, not this group, but there's always dumb people doing dumb things, sadly. Anybody? Yes. Clearly not, right? No. I mean, I don't. I'm not a writer by trade at all. And, for me, my kind of job at The Onion never started out on the creative side. I've just learned how to manage creative teams. And what makes The Onion, to me, so special as a company, and I think you see it in all these jokes, is like it's the only humor publication around that doesn't have bylines, or really only publication maybe outside of The Economist. Meaning the best ideas always get created and no one knows from whom. And what that does is it creates this unbelievably collaborative environment where no one is afraid to take impact or feedback from anyone else. Everyone iterates on jokes together, and there's no one who gets full credit. But for me, I'm just an accounting guy. Outgoing accountant staring at the other guy's shoes. It does. There's like a really intense process to get into the contributor pool or to get a staff writer job. Like to get into kind of a contractor job is, beating out. We hire 2 out of 1,000 every 6 months who apply with full writer packets. So it'll be tough, but we're happy to look at your submissions. Yes. Yeah, I personally think The Economist is probably the most reasonable news source in, like overall in terms of kind of its depth and breadth of coverage and also ability to communicate it easily. New York Times, Wall Street Journal, even though they can be called fake news, I think are really powerful. So yeah, I think those are to me the big 3, and that's not dismissing the Chicago Tribune where I live or the Star Trib, right? It's still up here, or whatever the St. Thomas magazine is, which is brilliant. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think the kind of foundation of The Onion, how it was started was, was driven for business goals, but quickly it became kind of an institution within in America, kind of influencing national discourse. I think the 9/11 edition was kind of a moment where people actually took The Onion as almost like having the pulse of America. And so I don't think that's ever changed since then. But I do feel every day with the amount of bad content out there or the kind of ridiculousness of the world, the more important it is for things to be true. We were talking at our lunch about how, there can be, and this is not meant to be like a politically charged speech about Donald Trump, for the record, but we're talking about, just how there's no tipping point, with anything that's happened that, in terms of like, lies, whether something's caught on video with Trump, you can just always dismiss it. Like it's brilliant. Like he's one of the smartest people around. And I feel like news organizations get tired of calling things out, and you even saw it in debates where they like repeat a question twice, he says no, and then they move on. So I feel like there needs to be people or institutions, whether they're real journalists who actually aren't afraid to make the same point enough times in a row, or people who can actually make a point that everyone's ignoring to actually get them to pay attention to it. So in that sense, I think the Onion's more important than ever. And just one small example, like the Onion was one of the first places to cover the the violation of human rights in Syria 5 years ago before CNN or New York Times or anyone was actually covering that. So we would write a ton of articles about that, just kind of making fun of the situation or saying that people would rather get a beer in America with Assad than they would with Obama. And people started to actually think and listen, and then those major news outlets actually started to care about it. So I think there is a responsibility of the Onion to actually do that, and I think it's more important than ever for people to actually take ownership of the information they consume. Yeah.
How do you know that you've been successful with your goal of popping these self-imposed bubbles and actually improving people's critical thinking?
I don't know if there's the answer other than, I think you see how many people actually read things, which is always helpful. And then I think the Syria example is a good example of getting people to actually bring attention to other news outlets, to actually pay attention to an issue. But in the end, it comes down to people being smart enough. But one of the fun things that I think has happened is when someone shares something from The Onion that is, completely ridiculous, and they say like, oh, this is exactly the point I'm trying to make, and they didn't understand what point we were trying to make, I think those are the moments where actual individuals get smarter. Because if you share something and you don't get the joke and you're telling everyone like this is the exact point and you're actually making the exact opposite point that you think you're going to make, I think that is how America gets smarter. So next time your aunt sends you something on Facebook that is from The Onion, not knowing what The Onion is, give her a little shit for it, okay? Okay, thank you.
Mike, thank you very much. Actually, one slight correction. Our admit rate is 0.8. Anyway, please join me again in giving Mike a warm round of applause. That was phenomenal. We're certainly grateful for your time and perspective, and we look forward to seeing all of you at our next First Friday Luncheon on March 2nd. We will then hear from John Ozzie Nelson, Chairman and CEO of Nelson, on the power of now. He will explore what he believes are the most significant elements of the era in which we live. On that note, have a great weekend, everybody, and thank you again for coming.